They mistook humanity for fragile until the war veterans answered. The sky cracked open at 3:00 in the afternoon while I was fixing the broken hinge on my barn door. One moment I was standing in the dust of my Montana farm with a wrench in my hand, and the next a silver streak tore across the blue sky, like someone had ripped the heavens with a knife. My old dog Buster started barking at the noise. I looked up and my chest went cold. I am Elias Vance. I am 71 years old. I served in the Kepler insurgency, the Mars Rebellion, and two smaller conflicts that nobody remembers anymore. My knees do not work the way they used to. My back hurts every morning when I climb out of bed, but that day when I saw that silver streak, my hand stopped shaking for the first time in 20 years. The streak slowed down and became a ship, a massive glowing ship, the size of a small city. It hung in the air above the farmlands, and I felt the hair on my neck stand up. Buster stopped barking and started whining instead. He pressed against my leg the way he used to do during thunderstorms. My pocket buzzed. The communicator that I had not used in months was lighting up. Like a Christmas tree, I pulled it out. With fingers that were stiff from arthritis, the screen showed an emergency broadcast from the galactic Concord, the alliance of alien races that humans had joined 60 years ago. I tapped the screen and the voice came through clear and calm. A tall glowing figure appeared on the small display. She was made of crystal, and her name was Ambassador Velthari. I had seen her on the news many times over the years. She was the official spokesperson for the Concord, and she had always been polite to humanity. Too polite, my old friends in service used to say, the kind of polite that hides something underneath. She spoke in a smooth voice. She told the people of Earth that the Vorsak Imperium, a race of insect-like beings, had broken the peace treaty. They were attacking human colonies on the outer rim. 3 colonies had already gone dark. 40,000 civilians were trapped on a mining world called Kessler's Reach. The Vorthak swarm was descending on them. I gripped the wrench tighter. I knew people on Kessler's Reach. My old squadmate Henry Walsh had retired there after the Kepler War. He raised goats and made cheese. He sent me a letter every Christmas. The thought of him being out there with insect ships dropping on his head made my stomach turn. But then Ambassador Velthari said something that changed everything. She said that humanity was a fragile species. She said that we were not built for war on this scale. She said that the Concord in its great wisdom would handle the situation, and that humans should evacuate their colonies and let the stronger races deal with the threat. She used the word fragile 3 more times in that broadcast. Each time the word hit me like a hammer. I stood there in my dusty work clothes, holding a wrench with my dog at my feet, and I felt something old wake up inside my chest, something I had buried after my last tour, something I thought was gone forever. Anger. Not the loud, hot kind of anger that young men have, the cold kind, the patient kind, the kind that has been sitting at the bottom of a well for 50 years waiting for someone foolish enough to lower a bucket. My communicator buzzed again. This time it was a private call. I looked at the name on the screen and my breath caught. Colonel Mario Reyes, my old commanding officer, the toughest woman I had ever met. She had to be 93 years old by now. I had not heard her voice in over a decade. I answered. Her voice was rougher than I remembered, but it still had that iron in it, the kind of iron that made entire platoons stand up straighter just by hearing her speak. She did not bother with hello. She never had. Ilyas, she said, did you hear what that crystal woman just called us? I've heard, ma'am. Fragile, she let the word sit in the air between us like a stone dropped into a pond. She called us fragile, Ilyas, on a public broadcast to the entire galaxy. Yes, ma'am. There was a long silence. I could hear her breathing. I could almost see her sitting in her old wooden chair, the one she had moved from base to base for 40 years. I could almost see her looking out a window with those gray eyes that had seen too many things. Then she said the words I had been waiting to hear without knowing I was waiting for them. Get your boots on, Ilyas. The old guard is standing up. She ended the call before I could answer. I did not need to answer. I walked back into my farmhouse with Buster trotting behind me. I went to the closet in the back room, the closet I had not opened in 15 years. The wooden door creaked when I pulled it open, and the smell of old leather and gun oil hit me in the face. My uniform hung there, the dark green of the Terran Marine Corps, the patches of every campaign I had served in. Boots polished and waiting just the way I had left them. And GT snorts. And GT. I touched the sleeve of the jacket, and 1,000 memories rolled through me like a freight train. I thought about my friends who had not come home. I thought about the young man I used to be. I thought about all the years I had spent thinking the war was behind me, and I realized something important. The war had never been behind me. It had been walking next to me my whole life, quiet as a shadow, waiting for me to need it again. I took the uniform off the hanger. While I was getting dressed, my communicator kept buzzing. Messages were coming in from people all over the world. Old soldiers, old pilots, old engineers, old medics, men and women in their 60s and 70s and 80s, people I had served with, people I had only heard stories about. The network was waking up quietly, without permission, without orders from any government. I learned later that the same thing was happening in every country on Earth at the same moment. Veterans were pulling their uniforms out of closets. Old officers were making phone calls they had not made in decades. Retired pilots were checking flight schedules. The young military, the official one, was busy following the Concord's instructions and preparing to evacuate the colonies. But the old guard, the ones the Concorde had forgotten about, was doing something different. By sunset, I was driving down a dirt road in my old truck with my uniform on and a duffel bag in the passenger seat. Buster sat next to the bag, his tongue hanging out, watching the world go by. The address Rays had sent me led to an abandoned airfield on the edge of the county. I had passed it 100 times and never looked twice at it. When I pulled up to the gate, 2 men in plain black clothes stepped out from behind a concrete wall. They looked young at first, then I saw their eyes. The eyes were old, veteran eyes, the kind that have learned to see everything at once. They checked my identification, looked at Buster, gave me a small nod, and waved me through. The airfield was not abandoned at all. It was full of activity. Vehicles were rolling in from every direction. Old men and women were stepping out and being checked in by other old men and women. There must have been 1,000 people. They're all ready, and more were arriving. Every minute, I parked my truck and got out. Buster stayed close to my leg. A young soldier with a clipboard came up. To me, she had to be about 25. She looked at my name on her list and her eyes went wide. She straightened up and saluted me. I saluted back. It felt good. It felt like coming home. Master Sergeant Vance, she said. Colonel Reyes is expecting you in Hangar 3. They are starting the briefing in 20 minutes. I thanked her. As I walked toward the hangar, I saw faces I recognized and faces I did not. Some of them I had not seen in 40 years. There was old Pete Sullivan, who had pulled me out of a burning vehicle on Kepler. There was Dorothy Hale, who had been the best sniper in our division. There was a man with a long white beard who I did not recognize until he turned, and then I almost dropped my bag. It was Captain Walter Briggs, who everyone thought had died in the Belt Wars. He grinned at me and tipped his hat. Hangar 3 was huge inside. It was filled with rows of folding chairs and a stage. At the front, most of the chairs were already taken. The crowd was a sea of gray hair and weathered faces. I found a seat near the back. Buster sat at my feet like he had been doing it his whole life. A door at the side of the stage opened, and Colonel Maria Reyes walked out. Whole hangar went quiet. She was small and thin now, smaller than I remembered. Her hair was white as snow. She walked with a slight limp, but her back was straight and her eyes were sharp. And when she stepped up to the microphone, every old soldier in that room sat up, the way we had been trained to sit up half a century ago. She looked out at us for a long moment. She did not smile. She never smiled before a mission. Then she leaned into the microphone and her voice filled the hangar. Brothers and sisters, she said, Galaxy has decided that we are fragile. A low rumble went through the crowd, not loud, just a sound like distant thunder. They have decided that we are too old. They have decided that we are too soft. They have decided that we should sit in our homes and watch our colonies be wiped off the map by an enemy they say we cannot fight. The rumble grew louder. 40,000 humans are trapped on Kessler's Reach. The conquered is not coming. The young military has been ordered to stand down. Every other race in the galaxy has decided that humanity is not worth saving. She paused. She looked across the rows of faces. She looked at me. I could swear she looked right at me, even from the back. But they forgot something, she said. They forgot about us. The rumble stopped. The hangar was completely silent. They forgot that there are men and women in this room who fought on Mars when the dust storms turned the sky black. They forgot that there are pilots in this room who flew through asteroid fields when the navigation systems failed. They forgot that there are medics in this room who saved lives with nothing but their bare hands and a piece of cloth. They forgot that we never stopped soldiers. We just stopped wearing the uniform. I felt tears in my eyes. I was not the only one. The snorts man next to me, a stranger, was wiping his face quietly. In 1 hour, Ray said, we are launching a mission that no government has approved. In 1 hour, we are going to do something that the conquered said cannot be done. We are going to Kessler's Reach. We are going to bring our people home, and if the universe wants to call us fragile, we are going to teach the universe what that word actually means. She stepped back from the microphone. Nobody cheered. Old soldiers do not cheer. We just stood up, all of us at once like one body. We stood up because we had been waiting for this moment for longer than most of the galaxy had been alive. We stood up because we were not done yet. We stood up because somewhere out there a man named Henry Walsh was waiting for help, and he was going to get it from people the universe had written off. I looked down at Buster. He looked up at me. His tail wagged once. I picked up my duffel bag and walked toward the staging area. My knees did not hurt anymore. My back felt straight. I was 71 years old, and I was going back to war, and for the first time in 20 years I felt like myself again. The galaxy had no idea what it had just woken up. The drop pod shook so hard that my teeth rattled. I gripped the harness straps and tried to breathe slowly the way I had learned to breathe a long time ago. Across snorts from me, Maria Ray sat with her eyes closed, chewing on a piece of gum. She looked like she was taking a nap. I had seen her do this before drops 50 years ago, and it had not changed. The pod shuddered again as we entered the atmosphere of Kessler's Reach. Through the small porthole window, I could see the planet below us. It was supposed to be a peaceful mining world with green valleys and small towns. Now, it was covered in smoke and red flashes. The Vorta ships were everywhere, hanging in the sky like a swarm of black hornets. Next to me sat a woman named Inez Castellanos. She was 102 years old. She was the oldest person on this mission, and she was a pilot. She had flown gunships in the Mars Rebellion. She had retired 60 years ago when the call went out. She had walked out of her nursing home in San Diego, gotten on a private plane, and reported for duty. She was wearing a bright red lipstick, and her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun. She caught me looking at her and winked. "First drop in a while, Elias?" she asked. "20 years, ma'am." "I have not done one in 50, she said. "But you know what they say, it is just like riding a bicycle." I laughed. I had not laughed in months. The sound felt strange in my own throat. Across from us, a young alien officer sat strapped into her own harness. Her name was Lieutenant Asara. She was from a feline race called the Pelari. The Concord had assigned her to observe our mission. They had picked her because she was young and curious, and would write a polite report afterward about how the human elders had failed bravely. Her ears were flat against her head, and her tail was twitching in nervous patterns. She kept staring at us like she was watching a group of grandparents about to walk off a cliff. "You should not be here," she said in her translated voice. "You are too old for this. The pod will hit hard. Your bones will not handle the impact." Inez patted her on the knee. "Honey," Inez said, "my bones have been broken 11 times. I am made of titanium and stubbornness. I will be fine." The pilot's voice came through the speakers. 30 seconds to landing. We were dropping into the eastern district of the colony's main city, where the Vorthak had broken through the defensive walls. Our job was to clear the streets so that civilians hiding in the underground shelters could be evacuated to the extraction ships waiting on the outer plains. Ray's opened her eyes. She looked at each of us one by one. Her face was calm. "Remember the training," she said. "Move slow, move smart. The young run, we do not run, we endure. We outlast. That is what we are." The pod hit the ground. The impact was hard, but the suits we were wearing absorbed most of it, the Hadrian suits. That was what they called them. They were special exoskeletons designed for older bodies. They supported our joints, helped our muscles, sharpened our hearing, brightened our vision. They had been developed in secret over the last 30 years. The conquered had no idea they existed. Most of Earth's young soldiers had no idea they existed either. They had been built for us, for this day. The pod door blew open. We unhooked and stepped out into a street that looked like a nightmare. Buildings were on fire, smoke filled the air. The bodies of Vorthak soldiers lay in piles. The colony's defenders had made their last stand before falling back. Through the smoke I could see the silhouettes of the enemy moving toward us, drawn by the noise of our landing. Lieutenant Essara stepped out behind us. Her translator was set to record everything. She raised it now, expecting to record our last moments. What she recorded instead changed her life forever. Reyes raised one hand, just one, and every old soldier in that street dropped into position without making a sound. Behind cars, behind walls, behind the burned-out shells of trucks, we disappeared like ghosts. Inez climbed up the side of a building like she was 30 years old, pulling herself up with the help of the suit. Old Pete Sullivan went prone on a rooftop with a long rifle. I took cover behind a stone fountain in the middle of the square. The Vorthak came around the corner. There were maybe 60 of them. They were tall, with hard black shells and 4 arms. Their leader was even taller, with red markings on his face. He was clicking commands to his soldiers in their strange language. He looked confident. He looked like he expected to find scared old people running for their lives. He found nothing instead. He stopped in the middle of the street. His soldiers stopped behind him. They scanned the buildings. They scanned the alleys. They could not see us even though we were all around them. Old soldiers know how to be still. We have practiced being still our whole lives. We have been still in the woods waiting for danger. We have been still in our homes waiting for phone calls about loved ones. We have been still in our beds at night when the memories come. Stillness is what we are made of. The Vorthak leader took one more step forward. That was when Reyes whispered into the team channel. Now, what happened next was not a battle. Battle is when two sides fight. This was something else. This was old patience meeting new arrogance. This was 30 years of training meeting 20 seconds of confusion. By the time the Vorthak leader understood what was happening, half of his soldiers were already down. Inez fired her rifle from the rooftop and dropped 4 enemies in 4 shots. Pete Sullivan picked off the squad commanders with surgical precision. Dorothy Hale moved from cover to cover so quickly that the suit must have been compensating for her age in ways I could not see. I rose from behind the fountain, fired 3 carefully aimed shots, and ducked back down before the enemy could even turn toward me. We did not shout. We did not charge. We did not waste a single round. We fought the way our old instructors had taught us to fight when the world had been simpler and the enemies had been human. We fought like the war had never ended. Lieutenant Essara watched all of this from behind the drop pod, her translator still recording, her ears now standing straight up in shock. She had been told that humans were fragile. She had been told that human elders were weak. What she was watching was not weakness. What she was watching was something she had No word for in her language. She started searching for that word, and she would spend the next 10 years of her life trying to find it. Within 4 minutes, the street was quiet. Again, 60 Vorthak soldiers lay still. Not one of us had been hit. Ray stepped out from behind a pillar and walked into the middle of the road. She looked around at the wreckage. She nodded once. "Move out," she said. "We have a colony to save." We moved through the city block by block. We found pockets of Vorthak troops at every corner. We did not engage them like the conquered stronger races would have engaged them. We did not charge. We did not shout. We waited. We watched. We struck at the right moment. We faded back. We let them chase shadows. We let them get tired. We let them get scared. At the underground shelter near the city center, we found 3,000 civilians huddled in the dark. When we opened the doors, they thought it was the Vorthak coming. For them, mothers were holding their children, fathers were standing with broken pipes in their hands, ready to fight to the last. Then they saw us. They saw the gray hair under our helmets. They saw the wrinkles on our faces. They saw the patches on our shoulders from wars they had only read about in history books. A small boy stepped forward. He could not have been more than 7 years old. He looked up at me with huge eyes. He pointed at the patch on my arm, the patch from the Kepler insurgency. "Are you a hero?" he asked. I did not know what to say. I am not a hero. I am just an old man who got his uniform out of the closet. I knelt down, so I was at his eye level. The suit made my knees pop, but I did not feel the pain. "No, son," I said, "I'm just somebody who came back to help." He hugged me. He was small and warm and shaking. I held him for a moment, and then I gave him to Inez, who carried him out of the shelter with 5 other small children. The suits made her strong enough. She walked them all the way to the extraction ships without stopping. Once we moved toward the next shelter, Henry Walsh, my old squadmate, was supposed to be near there in a farming district called Green Valley. I had told myself I would not look for him personally. I had told myself the mission came first, but as we cleared the streets, I kept looking. We found Green Valley by sundown. Vorthak had reached it before us. The houses were burning. The fields were churned up. A small group of civilians had taken shelter in an old stone barn. They had been holding off the enemy for 2 days with hunting rifles and farm tools. When we arrived, the Vorthak were closing in for the final assault. Rays took one look at the situation and made a decision. Inez, take the rooftops. Pete, the tree line. Dorothy, the back road. Elias with me, direct approach. We moved. The fight at Green Valley lasted 6 minutes. 6 minutes of patient, quiet, devastating work. When it was over, the survivors came out of the barn slowly, hands raised, expecting more enemies. Then they saw who had saved them. An old woman in the front, gray-haired and tough-looking, started laughing. She laughed until she cried. "We were waiting for the army," she said. "They sent us their grandparents instead, thank God." I scanned the faces of the survivors. There were maybe 40 of them. I did not see Henry. My heart sank. Then a thin voice called from the back of the group. "Elias Vance, you old idiot, is that you?" Henry Walsh pushed through the crowd. He was thinner than I remembered. He had a bandage on his arm and a streak of soot across his face, but he was alive. He was standing. He grabbed me in a hug. That nearly knocked me over. You came, he said. You actually came. Of course I came, Henry. They said you were too old. They were wrong. We stood there for a long moment, two old men in a burning village on a dying world, two men who had survived everything the universe had thrown at them, two men who had no business still being alive, and yet here we were alive. Together, in the middle of a war we were not supposed to be fighting. Behind us, Lieutenant Shara was recording everything. She was crying. Her people did not cry the way humans cried, but something close to it was happening. She was learning something that her textbooks had never taught her. By midnight, we had cleared the entire Eastern District. The civilians were on the extraction ships. The Vorthak commander had pulled his forces back to regroup. He had expected to take the colony in 6 hours. We had made him spend 6 hours just trying to understand what he was fighting. Rays gathered us in the town square. We were tired. Some of us were wounded, old wounds mostly, the kind that come from old bodies pushed too hard, but none of us were leaving. None of us would leave until every civilian was off this rock. She looked at us and gave a small, rare smile. Day one, brothers and sisters, she said. Welcome back to work. Above us, the Vorthak ships hung in the dark sky like waiting predators. They were not done with us. They were going to come back harder. They were going to throw everything they had at us. We were ready. We had been ready our whole lives. The second day on Kessler's Reach started with the sound of engines. Big engines, the kind that make the ground shake before you even see what is making the noise. I was on watch at the eastern barricade when the sound first reached us, and I knew immediately that the Vorthak had brought something new to the fight. I climbed up to a higher position to get a look through the binoculars built into my helmet. I could see them coming over the horizon, walkers, massive, four-legged war machines, each one as tall as a 3-story building. There were 12 of them, and they were marching in a steady line toward the city. Behind them came thousands of foot soldiers. The Vorthak commander had figured out something important overnight. He had figured out that he could not beat us with regular troops, so he had decided to crush us with sheer firepower. Instead, I called Rays on the team channel. She was already on her way to the eastern wall. I see them, Ilyas, she said. Stay calm. We knew this was coming. 12 walkers, Maria. We do not have anything that can take down 12 walkers. We have us. She arrived a minute later, climbing the broken stairs to the rooftop where I was set up. She did not look at the enemy. She looked at the city behind us. The civilians were still being loaded onto the extraction ships at the spaceport. They needed at least 4 more hours to finish the evacuation. 4 hours, she said. We just have to hold for 4 hours. Lieutenant Shara was with her. The Pilari officer had not slept. Her fur was matted, and her uniform was dirty. She had stopped trying to be a neutral observer somewhere around midnight and had started helping us carry the wounded. Now she stood on the rooftop, staring at the approaching walkers with wide green eyes. Colonel Rays, she said quietly, you need to retreat. There is no honor in being crushed by superior force. Concord will understand. I can call in an emergency extraction for your people. We can be off this planet in 20 minutes. Rays turned to her. The old colonel did not look angry, she just looked patient. The way a teacher looks at a student who is asking the wrong question. Lieutenant Ray said, "Do you know what those walkers are designed to do? They are heavy assault platforms. They are meant to break fortified positions." "Yes, and do you know what every old soldier on Earth has spent the last 50 years thinking about?" Esara blinked. "I do not understand. How to break a heavy assault platform with nothing but what you have in your pockets," Ray said, "because that is what we did during our wars. We did not have fancy weapons. We did not have shields. We had ourselves. We learned how to take down giants with stones." She tapped her communicator and spoke to the rest of the team. "All units, this is Ray. Plan quiet. Hammer, repeat, plan quiet, hammer, move to your positions." I had not heard the words quiet hammer in 45 years. It was an old training drill. We had practiced it for months. Back in our prime on a desert range in New Mexico, we had practiced it against simulated walkers built for testing. After the Mars Rebellion, the technique had been classified as obsolete. The young military had moved on to bigger weapons. We had moved on to retirement homes, but none of us had ever forgotten it. I climbed down from the roof and joined my squad in the streets. There were 6 of us. We carried only what we could fit in our packs: rope, tools, a few small charges, some welding equipment, things you could find in any farmer's barn. Nothing that looked dangerous on its own. We split into pairs and moved toward the alleys near the eastern wall. The plan was simple, the way the best plans always are. The walkers were too heavy to maneuver in tight streets. They were designed for open ground. Once they entered the city, they would have to follow the main avenues, and the main avenues had narrow alleys connecting them. We had spent the night setting up. The first walker entered the city at 6:00 in the morning. It was a great, hulking thing with red eyes glowing in its head and weapons mounted on every side. It crushed an abandoned car under 1 foot as it walked. The pilot inside must have been laughing. He must have thought he was about to wipe out a few stubborn old people. He passed under a cable that ran between 2 buildings. The cable was thin. He did not even notice it. We had spent 3 hours setting that cable up, anchored to the strongest steel beams we could find in the wreckage of an old factory. When the walker was directly underneath, I gave the signal. Inez on the rooftop dropped a heavy weight from a crane we had repaired in the dark. The weight pulled the cable tight. The cable wrapped around the walker's front leg. The walker took another step. The leg got caught. The walker tilted forward. It tried to compensate. It raised one of its other legs to catch its balance, but Pete Sullivan was already in the alley, and he had a small charge ready. He threw it under the rising leg. The charge went off just enough to push the leg in the wrong direction. The walker tipped further. Its huge body started to fall. Then the second cable, the one we had hidden under a layer of dust on the road, snapped tight around its other front leg. The walker fell. It crashed onto its side with a sound like the end of the world. Glass shattered, concrete cracked. The pilot inside screamed as his cabin tipped over. Dorothy Hale was waiting on the second floor of the building beside it. She climbed out the window onto the fallen walker. She walked along its side calmly, like she was walking down her own driveway. She found the maintenance hatch on top of the cabin, opened it, and dropped a small object inside. Then she climbed back into the building. The walker stopped moving. We did not stay to celebrate. There was no time. 11 more were coming. We moved to our next ambush point. In the next 2 hours, we took down 4 more walkers. Each one fell to a different trick. One was lured into a parking garage and trapped under the collapsing roof. One was led across a weakened bridge that had been mined by the colony's own engineers years ago and never disarmed. One walked into a street where every old radiator from every building had been laid on the ground, slowing its huge feet just long enough for Inez to drop something heavy on it. One was simply confused into walking off the edge of a canal because we had projected fake target images onto a wall. The Vorthak commander on the orbital ship was watching all of this through his sensor feeds. The recording showed his expression slowly changing from confidence to confusion to something close to fear. He had never seen this kind of warfare. His race had always won by being bigger and stronger and louder. Quietness was not in his playbook. Patience was not in his playbook. The idea that an enemy might use a piece of cable instead of a cannon was, to him, unthinkable. He had 7 walkers left. He pulled them back to the city limits and called for reinforcements. Reyes called all of us back to a small church near the city center. We met in the basement. There were 42 of us in the room. We were all tired. Some had bruises and cuts. Old Pete Sullivan was favoring his left arm where a piece of debris had hit him, but every one of us was alive. Reyes laid out a map on the floor. 3 more hours until evacuation is complete, she said. The enemy commander is going to send everything he has at us in one final push. He will not make the same mistakes. He will use his walkers carefully, and he will send his best troops with them. She pointed to a spot on the map. We are going to make our final stand. Here, the northern ridge. The civilians will be loaded onto the ships behind us. We hold the ridge. We do not retreat. We do not break. We give them 3 hours and then we go home. Nobody argued. Nobody asked questions. We had been through final stands before. Some of us had been through more than one. We knew what it meant. Lieutenant Isara was in the corner of the basement listening. She finally spoke up. I have decided something, she said. The whole room turned to look at her. I am not just an observer anymore. I want to fight with you. Ray studied her for a long moment. Lieutenant, you are not trained for this kind of warfare. No, but I can learn, and I have. Sidearm and I have steady hands, and I'm not leaving while you stay. A few of the old soldiers smiled. Inez stepped over and put a hand on the alien's shoulder. Welcome to the family, kid, she said. We moved to the northern ridge. It was a long, low hill that overlooked the spaceport. From the top we could see the extraction ships loading the last of the civilians. Henry Walsh was helping organize the lines. He saw me on the ridge and waved. I waved back. He gave me a thumbs up and went back to work. The Vorthak attack came 30 minutes later. It came in 3 waves. The first wave was foot soldiers, 3,000 of them. Charging up the slope, we let them come. We had set up positions all along the ridge in old defensive trenches that the colony had built decades ago and forgotten about. We had cleaned them out and reinforced them overnight. When the Vorthak came within range, we opened up. with everything we had. Old Pete Sullivan was in the central position with a heavy gun he had repaired from a colonial defense vehicle. He swept the slope in patient arcs, taking down dozens at a time. Dorothy Hale picked off the squad leaders from the flanks. I held the eastern trench with 5 other veterans, including a man named Frederick Holloway, who had been a tank commander on Mars and had not lost any of his nerve. We held our line. We did not move. We did not panic. The first wave broke against us and fell back. The second wave was the walkers, the 7 remaining giants. They came up the slope slowly and carefully, and they kept the foot soldiers behind them. This time the commander had learned he was not going to let us trap his machines again. But Reyes had planned for this too. The ridge was full of underground tunnels, old mining tunnels from when the colony had been founded. They ran all the way under the slope and came out behind the enemy lines, while the walkers focused on the front. Inez led a team of 15 veterans through the tunnels. They came up behind the foot soldiers and hit them from the rear. Confusion exploded through the Vorthak ranks. They had been trained to fight in formation. They had never been hit from 2 sides at once by an enemy they could not see clearly. The walkers tried to turn around to help, but they were too slow. While they turned, we hit their backs from the ridge. Cables, charges. The same techniques as before, refined. Now faster. 3 more walkers went down. The third wave was the Vorthak commander himself. He came down from his orbital ship in a personal landing craft. He was huge, even for his species, almost twice the size of his soldiers. His armor was decorated with the markings of 100 conquests. He landed at the bottom of the ridge with a personal guard of 50 elite warriors. He raised his arms and roared a challenge in his clicking language. His translator broadcast the words across our lines. Where is your leader? I demand a duel of honor. Your leader against me in single combat. Whoever wins the other side will surrender. It was an old Vorthak custom, he thought. It would intimidate us. He thought our leader, whoever they were, would be afraid to face him. He thought we would refuse, and that would prove we were cowards, and his soldiers would be inspired and charge again with renewed courage. He did not know Maria Reyes. She walked out of the trench, 93 years old, in a Hadrian suit with her white hair tied back under her helmet. She walked down the slope alone. Lieutenant Asara tried to follow her, but Reyes held up a hand without turning around. Stay there, Lieutenant. This is family business. The Vorthak commander watched her come. His expression changed from triumph to confusion to insult. You send an old female to fight me, he said through his translator. I am the leader, Reyes said, and I accept your challenge. The two of them met in the open ground. At the bottom of the ridge, both armies stopped fighting to watch. The commander pulled out a long curved blade. Reyes did not pull a weapon. She just stood there and waited. He charged. He was huge. He was fast. He was 300 years old in his own race's terms, which was the prime of a Vorthak warrior's life. He swung the blade in a wide arc. That should have ended Reyes immediately. She stepped to the side at exactly the right moment. He swung again. She ducked. He swung. Third time, she moved past him behind him and was gone before he could turn. He spun around, growing more frustrated. She did not attack him. She just kept moving, slipping past every strike, reading his patterns. Old Maria Reyes, who had once been the best hand-to-hand instructor in the entire Marine Corps, was teaching this giant insect a lesson in what humans call patience. After 2 minutes, he was breathing hard. After 3 minutes, he was furious. After 4 minutes, he stopped swinging and just stared at her. "What are you?" he said through his translator. "I am tired," Reyes said. "I am old. I'm not afraid of you. You should be afraid of me." She moved then, just one quick movement. Her hand went to a small weapon at her belt and she fired once. The shot hit the joint in his armor that protected his neck. He fell to his knees. He looked up at her with confusion in his huge eyes. "How?" he asked. "Because I have buried better warriors than you," she said. "You are not even the worst thing I have faced this week." He fell forward. The Vorthak ranks went silent. Their commander was down. Their walkers were destroyed. Their attack had failed. Behind us, the last of the extraction ships was lifting off from the spaceport. The civilians were safe. The Vorthak forces broke. They fell back. They retreated all the way to their ships and lifted off the planet. We had held Kessler's reach. Reyes walked back up the ridge slowly. She was tired. We could all see how tired she was. Lieutenant Eshara ran down to help her, but Reyes waved her off and walked the rest of the way under her own power. When she reached the top, she sat down on a rock and took off her helmet. Her white hair was wet with sweat. "Somebody get me a glass of water," she said, "and tell the boys it is time to go home." We laughed. Even the Pelali officer laughed in her own way, a soft, chittering sound. Around us, the old soldiers were already gathering up the wounded and helping each other to the transport ships. Henry Walsh climbed up the ridge and gave me a long hug. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Lieutenant Eshara stood next to me as we watched the sun rise over the saved city. She was quiet for a long time. "In my language," she said finally, "we have a word for warriors who fight bravely and die. We have a word for warriors who fight bravely and live. We have a word for the strong. We have a word for the wise. We do not have a word for what you are." I looked at her. I thought about how to answer. "In our language," I said, "we have a word for it." "What is the word?" I smiled. "Old." She laughed again. Then she pulled out her translator and started writing a report. I knew without asking that this report was going to change things. It was going to be read by every member of the Concord Council. It was going to be read by every alien race that had ever called us fragile. It was going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. That was fine. We had other work to do. And the Concord Council building floated above the capital world of Thuras like a giant glass flower. I had never seen anything like it. Inns was standing next to me at the window of the transport ship, looking down at the alien city, and even she was impressed. And Inns had seen everything. "It looks like something out of a children's book," she said. "It looks expensive," I said. She laughed. It was 3 weeks after the battle on Kessler's Reach. We had been called to address the Concord Council. Person Reyes was leading our delegation. With her were Inez, Pete Sullivan, Dorothy Hale, Lieutenant Eshara, and me. The Concord had requested that we explain ourselves, since our actions had violated their evacuation order. They had used the word Violation in their summons, they had used it 3 times. Reyes had not been bothered. She had simply said, let them ask their questions. Our ship docked at the lower port of the council building. We were met by delegation of Concord guards. They were tall and silver with faces that did not show emotion. They escorted us through long marble corridors lined with statues of great alien leaders from 1,000 worlds. The corridors were filled with diplomats and officials from every major race. Many of them stopped to stare at us. Word of Kessler's reach had spread fast. Lieutenant Esara's report had been published 2 weeks ago. It was now being read in every military academy in the Concord. The recordings she had made of our battle were being studied by analysts and historians. Her conclusion had been simple, and it had shaken the entire galaxy. The conclusion was this: humanity had been miscategorized. We had been listed as a Tier 4 fragile species for 60 years. The Concord scientists had based this rating on our short lifespans, our soft bodies, our lack of armor, and our lack of the psychic abilities that many other races possessed. The rating meant that we were considered weak, in need of protection, and unsuitable for serious military operations. Lieutenant Esara had argued that this rating was not just wrong but dangerous. Humans were not fragile. She wrote, humans were the most persistent species the Concord had ever encountered. Our bodies were soft, yes, but our minds, our memories, our cultures, our refusal to be broken, those were things the rating had completely missed. The Concord was now in a panic about what to do with us. We were led into the great chamber. It was a vast circular room with seats rising up in tiers all around a central floor. Every seat was filled, every species in the Concord had sent a representative. The sound of 100 different languages and translators filled the air, then went quiet as we stepped onto the floor. At the highest seat in the center sat Ambassador Velthari, the crystal woman, who had called us fragile on the broadcast that had started everything. She looked down at us with a face that was hard to read. Crystals do not show emotion the way human faces do, but there was something in the way she held herself, something that looked almost like uncertainty. She raised one hand and the chamber went completely silent. Citizens of the Concord, she said, her voice carrying through the hall, we are gathered today to address the matter of the human auxiliary action on Kessler's Reach. The humans before us are accused of violating the evacuation directive issued by this council. She looked at Reyes. Colonel Maria Reyes, you've been invited to speak in defense of your actions. The floor is yours. Reyes walked forward. She was using a cane today. The doctors had recommended it after the battle. She did not seem to mind. She stopped in the center of the floor and looked up at the rows of alien faces. Ambassador, she said, Council thank you for inviting us here. She paused. She let her eyes move across the chamber. She looked at each of the major delegations. The Drask, the towering rock-skinned warriors, the Mahari, the psychic ones with their silver eyes, the Fralian water breathers in their special tanks, the Pelari, who were Lieutenant Esara's people. She made eye contact with each delegation in turn. I am here to apologize, she said. The chamber rustled in surprise. This was not what they had expected. Several of the Drask delegates leaned forward. Their seats, Ambassador Velthari tilted. Her crystal head. Apologize, Velthari said. For what? Colonel. For the misunderstanding, Ray said. I think we have all been operating under a misunderstanding for a long time, and I think it is time to clear it up. She walked a slow circle in the center of the floor. Her cane clicked softly on the marble. 60 years ago, when humanity joined this council, your scientists studied us. They measured our bodies, they measured our lifespans, they measured our brains. They put us in a category called Tier 4 fragile. They did this with good intentions. They wanted to protect us. They wanted to keep us safe in a galaxy that they assumed would be dangerous to such a species. She stopped walking. She looked up at Velthari. But they made one mistake. They studied our bodies, and they did not study our history. Velthari was very still. Ray continued, humans have been fighting wars for 40,000 years. We did not get to space by being peaceful. We got to space by surviving every disaster that our planet threw at us. We survived ice ages. We survived plagues. We survived famines. We survived each other. We are not a young species. We are an old species, and every war we ever fought, every battle, every name of every man and woman who ever fell, we remember. We write it down. We teach it to our children. We tell it around fires at night. We carry our wars with us. A Drask delegate stood up. He was 9 ft. Tall, with skin like granite. He spoke through his translator. Colonel Reyes, every species carries its history. This is not unique to humans. Reyes nodded. You are right, Ambassador. Corthan, every species has a history. But how many species teach their elders to fight? How many species send their grandparents into battle alongside their grandchildren? How many species have a tradition where the oldest warriors are considered the most valuable because they have lost the most and have the least left to fear? The Drask paused. He looked at his fellow delegates. He did not have an answer. The Drask are mighty warriors, Reyes said. I have great respect for your people, but your warriors retire at 300 years old. You consider them too valuable to risk. The Mehari send only their psychics into battle, and they stop fighting at 400. The Fralian have professional warrior castes who never see combat after their second molt. Every race in this galaxy has a system where the old are protected and the young are sent to die. She raised her cane and pointed at her own chest. We are different. On Earth we have a saying, the young go to war because they are told to. The old go to war because they remember why. The chamber was completely silent. A Mehari delegate stood up next. She was small and slender, with silver eyes that glowed softly. Her name was Ambassador Threlin, and she was one of the most respected members of the council. No, Reyes, she said gently, we do not deny the bravery of your veterans. The reports from Kessler's Reach are extraordinary, but you must understand the political situation. Your species joined the conquered under specific terms. You agreed to follow our military protocols. You agreed to accept our protection by sending unauthorized forces into a contested zone. You have created a dangerous precedent. Other races may now wonder if they can also disregard conquered directives. Reyes nodded slowly. Ambassador Threlin, she said, I understand your concern, and I want to be clear. The veterans who deployed to Kessler's Reach did not violate any Human law, we are private citizens. We are retired. We are not part of the official Terran military. We deployed of our own free will with our own equipment, paid for by our own savings. Earth's young military followed your evacuation order without question. We did not. She let that sink in. You have a council rule that says no members military may engage in unauthorized action. Our military did not. You do not have a rule that says retired citizens may not defend their own people. There is no such rule. We checked. Several delegates stirred. Some of them began whispering to each other. Ambassador Velthari raised her hand. Again. Colonel Reyes, the legal point is noted, but I think we are missing the larger issue here. The Council classified humanity as fragile after Kessler's reach. This classification is clearly inaccurate. Are you here today to request a reclassification? Reyes shook her head. No, Ambassador, I'm not requesting anything. I am offering you something. Velthari leaned forward. What are you offering? A choice, Rey said. You can keep us classified as fragile and continue to underestimate us and continue to make the same mistakes the Vorthak made, or you can study us properly, learn what we actually are, and decide for yourselves what category we belong in. She turned to look at me. She gestured for me to step forward. I had not expected that. I walked up beside her, my hands feeling suddenly clammy. Thousands of alien faces looking down at me made me feel very small. This is Master Sergeant Elias Vance, Rey said. He is 71 years old. 3 weeks ago, he was fixing the door on his barn. He had not held a weapon in 20 years. When the call came, he put on his uniform and went to war. He fought beside me on Kessler's Reach. He saved a friend who had been waiting 2 days in a stone barn for help. He carried wounded children to safety. He has a dog named Buster. He grows tomatoes in his garden. She looked at me, then back at the council. This is what we are. Not soldiers, not warriors, not killers, just people who remember, people who, when called, will answer. There are about 200 million of us on Earth, veterans of all our wars, all our generations. Some are in their 60s, some are in their 90s. We do not march in parades. We do not boast. We grow vegetables and play with our grandchildren and chop wood for the winter. But every one of us, if you call us fragile in front of the people we love, will put down our gardening tools and go back to work. She paused. That is the offer, Ambassador. That is humanity. Do with that information what you will. The chamber was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Ambassador Velthari sat very still for a long moment, then she stood up slowly. She walked down from her high seat and onto the central floor with us. The crystal of her body caught the light and threw little rainbows on the marble. She stopped in front of Reyes. She looked at her for a long time. Colonel, she said, I owe you an apology. The chamber gasped. I called your people fragile on a public broadcast. I did this without proper understanding. I based my words on outdated information. I used a term that in your culture has implications I did not appreciate. I am sorry. Reyes did not smile, but she nodded. Apology accepted, Ambassador. In return, Velthari said, I am proposing to this council that we create a new classification, not fragile, not combatant, something else, a category that recognizes what your species actually is. I am proposing the term persistent. The Mehari ambassador rose. Persistent. A species that does not break. Velthari said, a species that does not forget. A species whose warriors do not retire from war, but only set it down. For a time, the vote was held that afternoon. It passed by a wide margin. Humanity was reclassified. We were no longer T4 fragile. We were now in our own new category, tier persistent. But the day was not done. As the council was finishing the vote, an alarm sounded through the building. Red light began flashing on every monitor. Ambassador Velthari turned pale, which is hard for Crystal to do. She listened to her communicator, then turned to face the chamber. News from the outer rim, she said. The Vorthak Imperium has launched a full invasion of the inner systems. They have bypassed Earth entirely. They are moving on 12 member worlds simultaneously. They have been planning this for months. They believed our political division after Kessler's reach would weaken our response. The chamber erupted in shouting. Reyes did not shout. She just looked at me with a small, tired smile. They learned the wrong lesson, Elias. She said, yes, ma'am. The conquered military was already mobilizing. Drashk warriors, Mehari psychics, Raelian fleets, every member race was racing to defend its borders. But 12 worlds simultaneously was more than the conquered forces could cover. Some worlds would fall before help arrived. Ambassador Velthari turned to Reyes. Colonel, she said, I know this is a difficult question, but I must ask. Would humanity be willing to assist? Reyes considered for a moment. How many of those 12 worlds are not human colonies? All 12. They are all member worlds of other species. You are asking us to fight for worlds that are not our own. Yes. Reyes glanced at me, then at Inez, then at the rest of our small delegation. We all gave her small nods. She turned back to the ambassador. The Veterans Auxiliary will deploy to all 12 worlds, she said. We will need transport and basic supplies. We will bring our own equipment and our own people. We will not require conquered command. We work better alone. Velthari closed her crystal eyes. How many people can you send? Reyes smiled fully then, for the first time since we had entered the building. Ambassador, she said, there are 2 million of us already mobilized. 2 million more will report for duty within 48 hours. By the end of the week, you will have 10 million human veterans deployed across your member worlds. We have been waiting for 60 years to be useful to you. We are no longer waiting. Velthara stared at her. 10 million elderly soldiers. 10 million people who remember. That afternoon, the largest military mobilization in human history began. Quietly, without fanfare, old men and women across Earth opened their closets, pulled out uniforms they thought they would never wear again, and reported to local stations. The Hadrian suit factories that had been operating in secret for 3 decades shifted to full production. Transport ships from a dozen alien races landed at human bases to ferry the veterans to the threatened worlds. Lieutenant Asara stood beside me as we watched the first wave of ships lifting off from Earth's main spaceport. She was crying again, quietly in her own way. Elias, she said, I am going with the Palari delegation back to my home world. The Vorthak are advancing on us as well. My people will need help. We will be there, I said. I know, she paused. Thank you for everything you have shown us, my people. Will not forget. She left to join her ship. I walked back to find Reyes. The old colonel was looking out a window at the launch pads. She had a faraway look in her eyes. What is it, Maria? I asked. I was just thinking, Elias, 3 weeks ago, I was sitting in my garden in Arizona. I was reading a book about birds. My biggest worry was whether to plant peppers or tomatoes this year. And now I am about to send 10 million of my brothers and sisters back to war. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were bright but steady. Are we doing the right thing, Elias? I thought about it. I think we are doing the only thing we know how to do, ma'am. She nodded slowly. Yes, I think you are right. The first wave of ships lifted into the sky. They carried 20,000 veterans to the front. Behind them, more ships were already loading. The galaxy was about to learn something it had been too proud to learn before. We were not done. We were just getting started. And the world they sent me to was called Vrendel. It was a forest planet home to a peaceful race called the Tarn, who looked something like deer that walked on 2 legs. They had soft fur and big, dark eyes and quiet voices. They had been members of the Conquered for 200 years. They were not warriors. They were artists and farmers and teachers. The Vorthak had decided to crush them as a message to the rest of the galaxy. Our deployment was 8,000 veterans led by an old colonel named Frederick Aldridge, who had served in the Belt Wars. I knew Aldridge by reputation. He was 84 years old and had a reputation for being slow, careful, and absolutely impossible to push around. He was exactly the right person for this kind of mission. The Tarn welcomed us with confused gratitude. They had been told that their human allies were elders coming to help. They had not understood what that meant. When the first transports landed and gray-haired humans began stepping out, the Tarn military commander, a tall buck-like being named Velrose, came to meet Aldridge with worried eyes. Colonel Aldridge, he said through his translator, I do not mean to give offense, but you and your people look very tired. The Vorthak have already destroyed 3 of our cities. They have walkers, fighters, and orbital support. Are snorts you sure your troops are equipped for this? Aldridge looked up at the tall Tarn commander. He was a good 2 ft shorter than Velrose. He smiled politely. Commander Velrose, he said, how many Vorthak ground forces are currently on your planet? Approximately 40,000. And how long do you estimate before they reach your capital? 6 days, perhaps 7. Aldridge nodded slowly. In 6 days, we will have the planet cleared. You can return to your art and your farms. Now, please, sir, I need maps of the local terrain, especially old mining areas, abandoned facilities, and any natural caves. Also, if you have any retired engineers or old veterans of your own conflicts, send them to me. We have work to do. Velrose stared at him, then he nodded slowly and walked away to make the arrangements. I was assigned to a team of 200 veterans operating in the Central Forest region. Our team leader was a woman named Beatrice Clark. She was 78 years old and had been a special operations specialist in the Mars Rebellion. She was also the most patient person I had ever met. She made Reyes look impulsive. We spent the first 2 days doing nothing. That is not quite right. We were doing many things. We were studying maps. We were talking to local Tarn farmers and getting information about Vorthak. Movement, we were setting up small observation posts in the trees. We were laying supply caches in caves, but we not engaging the enemy. We were not even letting them see us. The Vorthak knew we had landed. They knew humans were on the planet. They were searching for us, but every patrol they sent into the forest came back. Having seen nothing, we were ghosts in the trees. We let them search. We let them grow more confident. We let them believe that the human reinforcements were just rumors. On the third day, Beatrice gathered our team in a clearing. The Vorthak have established a forward base about 30 km north of here, she said. It is a supply depot for their main force. They have stockpiled weapons, ammunition, and medical supplies there. If we destroy that depot, we their entire offensive. She unrolled a map. The base has 600 guards, automated defenses, and 3 walkers. Standard frontal assault would require about 8,000 troops. We have 200, so we are not going to do a frontal assault. She pointed to the map. There is an old mining tunnel system that runs underneath the forest. It has not been used in 50 years. The locals say it is unstable. The Vorthak scanners confirm that it is structurally compromised. They have not bothered to guard it. Old Pete Sullivan, who had transferred to our team after Kessler's reach, leaned in to look. You want us to go through unstable mining tunnels? Yes. All 200 of us? Yes. He grinned. I am 86 years old. Beatrice, if the tunnels collapse on me, I have had a good run. She smiled at him. That is the spirit. Pete. We entered the tunnels at sunset. They were cramped and dusty and smelled of old earth. Some sections were so low that we had to crawl. The Hadrian suits made it easier on our bodies, but it was still hard work. Some of the older members of our team had to be helped along. Nobody complained. We had all done worse. We came up directly under the supply depot at 3:00 in the morning local time. The Vorthak guards above us were sleeping or watching the perimeter. They were not watching the floor. We blew a small hole upward, climbed out into the depot, and went to work. Within 40 minutes, we had set charges on every major supply container. We had disabled the 3 walkers by cutting key cables in their legs. We had captured the guard commander who had been sleeping in his quarters. We had rescued 7 Tarn prisoners who had been held in a holding cell. Then we walked out the front gate and disappeared back into the forest. The depot exploded behind us at 4:00 in the morning. The blast was so big that it lit up the sky for 100 km. The Vorthak forces on the planet woke up to find their main supply line gone. 2 days later, with their supplies running low and their walkers damaged, the Vorthak troops began to retreat toward their landing zones. We followed them, not in a charge, just in shadows. We picked off their patrols. We disrupted their communications. We turned their retreat into a long, slow nightmare of tiny disasters. By the 5th day, they had lost half their force without ever once seeing the people who were doing it to them. On the 6th day, exactly as Aldridge had promised Commander Velrose, the planet was clear. The remaining Vorthak forces had fled to their orbital ships and left the system. We had not lost a single veteran. The Tarns celebrated for 3 days. They held a feast in our honor. They gave us beautiful carved wooden statues as gifts. They taught us their songs. The young Tarn children who had been afraid of the strange short humans at first now followed us around like puppies. One little Tarn girl named Lyra adopted Beatrice as her grandmother. She would sit on her lap and play with her white hair and refuse to let go. Velrose came to Aldridge on the morning we were preparing to leave. "Colonel," he said, "I do not have the words to thank you. We thought we were going to lose our world. You saved us with 200 soldiers and a tunnel." Aldridge smiled. "We had a lot of help. Commander, your retired engineers told us about the tunnel. Your farmers told us about the Vorthak movements. Your people fed us and gave us shelter. We could not have done this alone." "But still," Velrose said, "your veterans, they are extraordinary." "They are just old," Aldridge said, "and old people remember how to do things." The Tarn made Aldridge an honorary member of their highest council. He was given a wooden ring carved with the symbol of their oldest forest. He wore it on a chain around his neck for the rest of his life. Across the other 11 worlds, similar things were happening. On the Drash colony of Korthax, 3,000 veterans led by Colonel Reese herself fought a 4-day campaign against 20,000 Vorthak. They won by drawing the enemy into a swamp where the heavy walkers could not move. The Drash warriors who fought alongside them learned more about strategy in those 4 days than they had learned in their previous 50 years of military training. On the Fralian water world of Pelagus, 1,500 elderly human submariners, all veterans of Earth's deep-sea conflicts, won a campaign by simply outlasting the Vorthak underwater forces. The Vorthak were not built for sustained underwater operations. The humans were. After 2 weeks of cat and mouse in the dark seas, the Vorthak ran out of supplies and surrendered. On the Mehari psychic home world, where the Vorthak had been counting on using mind-resistant troops, 4,000 human veterans demonstrated something the Mehari had never imagined. Old human minds, full of decades of memories and experiences, were almost impossible to attack with psychic weapons. The Vorthak psychic soldiers tried to invade the minds of the elderly humans and found themselves overwhelmed by 60 or 70 or 80 years of dense human experience. Several Vorthak psychic warriors went into mental shock from the experience and had to be evacuated. By the end of the first week, every one of the 12 worlds had been saved. By the end of the second week, the Vorthak Imperium had retreated entirely from conquered space. By the end of the third week, the Imperium had sent a delegation to discuss peace terms. They had lost almost half their forces in 3 weeks. They had never lost so much so fast to any enemy. Their commanders did not understand what had happened. Their soldiers were demoralized. Their empress, an old insect queen named Sithara, demanded to know who had defeated her armies. When she was told that the answer was elderly humans, she did not believe it. At first, then she watched the recordings, then she sent for her own oldest advisors, the ones she had pushed aside in favor of younger generals. She listened to them for the first time in years. She made several painful changes to her court. She also sent a personal letter to Earth. The letter was addressed to Colonel Maya Reyes It contained a single line. Old warrior to old warrior, I underestimated you. It will not happen again. Ray's read the letter on the back porch of her house in Arizona. She folded it and put it in her pocket. She poured herself a glass of iced tea and sat down to look at her garden. The galaxy was different now. Humanity had a new place in the Concord, not as a fragile species in need of protection, not as warriors in the traditional sense, something new, the persistent, the old ones, the race that did not forget. I went home to my farm in Montana. Buster was waiting for me. He had stayed with my neighbor while I was gone. He was overjoyed to see me. He licked my face and ran around my legs and barked at the sky for no reason. I petted him and walked back into my farmhouse. The barn door was still broken. I had never finished fixing it. I picked up my wrench from where I had left it in the dirt 3 weeks ago, in another life when the sky had cracked open and called me back to work. I walked over to the barn. I started fixing the hinge. Ine visited me a month later. She brought a bottle of good tequila and a jar of homemade salsa. We sat on my porch and watched the sun set over the mountains. Buster lay between us with his head on my boot. I hear they are writing a textbook about us, she said. I heard that too. They want to teach our methods at their military academies. They will struggle with it. She laughed. Why is that? Because they think it is about technique. It is not about technique. It is about what we carry inside. She was quiet for a long time. Ilyas, she said finally, do you think we will be called again? I thought about it. I thought about all the worlds out there, all the species that were watching humanity now with new eyes, all the threats that might come in our lifetimes or in our grandchildren's. I think we will, Inez, but that is all. Right, we will go when they call, and when we are gone, our children will remember, and their children will remember. That is what we are. That is what makes us different. We do not stop. We just rest sometimes. She nodded slowly. She raised her glass. To the old guard, she said. To the old guard, I said. We drank in the silence of the evening. The stars came out one by one, and I could see them now in a way I had never seen them before. They were not just stars anymore. They were places. They were homes. They were people we had saved and people we had not yet met. They were the future. I thought about all the years I had spent feeling useless, all the years I had spent thinking my best days were behind me, all the years I had thought of myself as just an old man with a bad back and a barn that needed fixing. I had been wrong. The galaxy had been wrong about us, and I had been wrong about myself. We were not finished. We had never been finished. We had just been resting, waiting, remembering, carrying our wars with us, quiet as shadows for the day when somebody needed us again. 6 months later, the Concord opened a new building on the capital world of Thuras. It was called the Hall of the Persistent. Inside it were the names of every human veteran who had served in the Vorlag War. The names were carved into walls of dark stone. There were also recordings, photographs, and personal artifacts. The Tarn had donated the wooden ring that Aldrich had been given. The Drashk had donated a piece of armor from one of the walkers we had taken down. The Mehari had donated a written account of the psychic battle. The hall became a place of pilgrimage. Visitors from every member race came to walk through it. They came to look at The names, they came to read the stories. Most of them were young. Most of them were warriors of their own species. They came because their teachers had told them to. They came to learn about the strange, short-lived race that had changed everything. When I visited the hall 3 years after the war, I found my own name on the wall. It was a small name among thousands, but there was a small inscription next to it. It said, Elias Vance, Master Sergeant, Terran Marine Corps. He came back to work. I stood there for a long time. I read the names of my friends, some living, some not. Pete Sullivan had passed away the year before. He had died in his sleep peacefully, surrounded by his grandchildren. Dorothy Hale was still alive, still teaching marksmanship at the new academy. Inez Castellanos was 106 years old and had just published a memoir. I was an old man again. My back hurt. My knees hurt. I walked with a cane now. But I was not done. None of us were. There was still work to do. There were still skis to plant and grandchildren to teach and stories to tell. There were still skis to watch. And if those skis cracked open again, I would put on my uniform one more time. And I would go. We all would. Because that is what we do. That is what we are. We are the persistent. We are the ones who do not forget. And we are still here. The end.